Villains in traditional fiction and fantasy seem to simply be destined to fail. No matter how genius they are, how much power they amass, how ruthlessly they execute their plan, one way or another, the heroes of that story always arrive right at the finish line to thwart their schemes and ensure the rest of the world kind of gets their happily ever after. This is the tried and true formula, especially when it comes to something like video games. We the players sit down and expect that arc, that eventual satisfaction, and to put it simply, we expect to win. However, when game developers and writers take those very traditional expectations and just decide to play around with them even a little bit, things can get very, very interesting. Now, on the surface, Final Fantasy VI appears to be a rather cutesy, classic, and lighthearted RPG adventure full of humor and lovable characters, and believe me, at times those things are all absolutely true and then some. But I think when you get a few hours into this experience, immerse yourself in its story, the world, and witness some of the truly horrific events unfolding right in front of you, you begin to understand that things aren't so rosy. There are dark, difficult themes woven into the very fabric of this game. There are legitimate war crimes being committed during times of ruthless conquest, and there is an antagonist here that is literally built to toy with all of your assumptions of traditional video game storytelling. Kefka Palazzo is a chaotic, sadistic, foolishly clad court mage with an unquenchable thirst for destruction. A video game villain that has for over 30 straight years now been considered one of the single greatest this medium has ever seen, period. A character who seems at first to be the underling of a far grander bad guy, but slowly and surely grows in his ambition into something truly, unstoppably evil. Kefka here, my friends, really has it all. A messed up backstory, an abusive, insane personality, and a vision for the future that involves indiscriminate killing on a scale so massive it's gonna make your head spin. Because as we all know, some men just want to watch the world burn. Ladies, gentlemen, welcome to the Villainpedia, a video series where we take long, hard looks at the most evil characters the world of video games has to offer and try to find out what makes them really tick. I am Ghost, your host as always, and this is an entry I've been excited to make for a very, very long time. A quick thank you to all of my amazing patrons for always supporting this channel away from YouTube. You guys are the best. And now, let's get very nihilistic and dive into one of the true greats of video game evil, the notorious, the terrible Kefka Palazzo. Well, Final Fantasy VI's setting and world is one shaped by war. During the events of the game, of course, but perhaps more importantly, generations before in this ancient conflict known as the War of the Magi. And to fully understand the subject of today's video, well, this is all essential stuff. 1,000 years before Final Fantasy VI begins, three gods known as the Fiend, the Demon, and the Goddess descended from the heavens down to the mortal plane and, fearing each other's power, instinctively began battling for dominance over the world. Now, these gods very creatively came to be known as the Warring Triad, and their quarrel here was cataclysmic for the planet. Forests burned, mountains crumbled, and oceans boiled. Humans, animals, and other living things caught up in all this mayhem were either killed or transformed into magical creatures called espers and then enslaved, forced against their will to fight in the name of one of these three gods until all of existence teetered on the brink of oblivion. That's when suddenly the Warring Triad stopped. They realized their recklessness, and looking around at the chaos they had created, the pain and suffering the world was enduring, they together vowed to end the war immediately. After granting the espers freedom from their magic, they used their remaining essence to petrify themselves, sealing away their power and taking the shape of three massive stone statues, set in perfect alignment with one another to ensure a balance of this magic. Then, with their last words, the Triad warned the espers that they should never be awoken again, nor should their alignment ever be disrupted. So a very sudden, selfless act from these gods, and it proved to be a fruitful one for life on Earth. As the sands of time flowed on, the world was able to heal, and eventually, from the ashes of this past, humanity emerged and lived in peace alongside the remaining magical espers. They created settlements and eventually towns and cities all over these two continents, but sadly, that peace would prove to be short-lived. Soon enough, humans learned to wield raw magic just like the espers could, and attempted to seize the ancient power infused in their counterparts to grow even stronger. And so, war raged yet again. Many died on both sides, and in the end, the Espers decided to just straight up leave, opening a door to another dimension entirely where they could live in peace away from the greed and stupidity of humans. But very key is they also made sure to take that petrified triad with them in hopes of protecting their destructive potential, because, would you trust this guy right here? I don't think so. This ended up being a great move for everyone, really, because as the centuries passed, the War of the Magi really became like a cautionary legend. The Espers thrived peacefully in their own realm, and humanity kind of forgot them, left behind the arcane arts, and instead turned to industrialization. But of course, there were some who still kept those old stories alive. The Gestalian Empire, located on the southern continent here, was kind of the epicenter of technology and innovation. And its emperor, a vile, power-hungry man named, Gestal, made it his personal business to locate this supposed hidden Esper world of the past. I'm sure many around him laughed off the story as a fairy tale, a fable, but he knew that if it were real, and he felt it was, there might be some way to harvest the power in that realm and bring magic back to the world of humans. Well, eventually, after a long search effort to the east, beyond a humorously dramatic and obvious big-ass sealed door, he found it. Gestal then invaded that realm with soldiers and captured several Espers by force, breaking the centuries-long peace. And then he, along with the genius inventor of the Empire, Cid Marquez, got to work experimenting with various methods of extracting the magic, really the very life from these creatures, in hopes of infusing humans and even machines with pure power. This extremely unethical new technology would be known as Magitech, and it was primed to change the world. But eventually, after years of experiments and theory crafting, it was time for a real trial run. A human subject was needed, and so a single knight from the Imperial Army was hand-selected to be that first guinea pig, and it was a man named Kefka Palazzo. Now, sadly, we know literally nothing about this guy this early on in his life, where he initially came from, what his personality was like, why he was enlisted in the army at all. And we especially don't know why he was selected to become the first Magitech Knight, but there's gotta be a good reason. So maybe Kefka was a particularly strong, loyal, level-headed soldier and was deemed the safest bet should anything happen to go wrong. But I think the theory I like significantly more is that he was the complete opposite. Weak, frail, and cowardly, really one of the lowest on the totem pole and deemed so utterly useless, the world wouldn't miss him if the test somehow went awry. Almost like the evil version of Captain America's backstory, you know? But regardless of who he was and why he was picked, when this mysterious young man was tied into the machinery and the switch was flipped, several things happened. Kefka was imbued with the power of the Espers. He attained the ability to cast magic, an unprecedented success for humanity. But in the process, Kefka's mind was shattered, scrambled, twisted. He emerged as both the first Magitech Knight and a complete madman. Beyond just mad, he was sadistic, he was mean, he was cruel, he was unpredictable and had acquired a certain bone-chilling laugh that anyone who has played Final Fantasy VI will know and love. But still, Kefka was deemed a huge win for the Empire, understandably, and his loyalty to Gestal made him a key asset for the plan moving forward, which was, of course, total world domination, baby. The Emperor and Cid further refined the Magitech process, infusing more and more soldiers without breaking their minds, and even constructed unthinkably complex Magitech-boosted machines of warfare. Gestal wished to use all these new toys to quickly conquer all neighboring kingdoms, catching them by surprise, then grow his personal power and eventually sit atop the greatest empire the world had ever known. Now, if you ask me, those are pretty boring aspirations, but alas, with Kefka on the front lines, this war of conquest began. I am proud to share with you guys that this video is sponsored by myself.
What?
Hey man, it's true. Now today, right now, in fact, is the grand opening of the ghostshop.com, the one and only digital marketplace for official, real Ghostcharm merchandise. We got t-shirts, we got sweaters, we got hoodies, and so much more, with every single one of those designs you see on the site being thrown together by yours truly. Graphic design really is my passion, dude. And genuinely, I tried to make some cool stuff that my close friends, myself, and hopefully you too, would actually enjoy wearing for years to come. I especially like the exquisite lore tee and the stitched Gothic G baseball cap. So many of you guys over the years have sent me messages on Discord or emails asking the best ways to support the channel outside of just becoming a patron, and well, with the launch of theghostshop.com, this is definitely it. To celebrate the opening of the shop, I'm going to bestow upon y'all a fat promo for 15% off your entire order. Just put in code GHOSTOPENING at checkout and enjoy your bargain, son. Use the code as many times as you like between now and the end of January 2025. Now, thank you to myself for sponsoring this video, and thank you to all of you guys for the amazing continued support. Now, let's resume. So Mr. Palazzo here, being the first of the Magitech Knights, was massively important enough by just surviving the process at all. But as a weapon of the Empire during their hasty expansion, he proved to not only be effective, but particularly dangerous and, well, evil. Never shying away from killing innocent people, burning villages to the ground, or even putting the blade to his fellow soldiers if they refused to follow his rather brutal orders. Now this was Gestall's style, and Kefka quickly found himself appointed to a very high position, the court mage of the entire empire. Really the second-hand man of the emperor and a general, as this force was toppling unsuspecting foes every single day. But I think it is very important to note here that others within the Imperial Army not named Gestall did not share the Emperor's love for Palazzo. The average rank-and-file soldier was understandably terrified of him, and other generals thought his methods were just needlessly hateful and barbaric. But it is perhaps just as important to note Kefka's physical appearance, which is obviously extremely iconic. Now he looks, I guess you could say, pretty flamboyant, right? Tons of colorful billowing capes and gowns with mismatching patterns and layers. The long blonde hair and this tight ponytail, and most noticeably, of course, is his Joker-esque makeup, white cast with colorful adorning features around the eyes and mouth. Now within the confines of Final Fantasy VI, we really only get to see Kefka depicted as this cute little pixel clown. But future guest appearances of this villain, as well as his original concept art from Yoshitaka Amano, show the intended kind of sense of style. I would say he looks quite a bit like a jester, like a fool, a court entertainer, which if you have watched my channel before or just looked at my profile picture, you might know this is my favorite archetype ever. And really when you dig into it, you see that so much of Kefka's design, aside from just that makeup, comes from the classic Italian Commedia dell'arte stock character called Arlecchino, or the Harlequin. Now this is like a 16th century stage play archetype, characterized by a couple of key things. A colorful checkered or mismatched costume, his role as a servant to a stern master, his light-hearted jokester disposition, his unpredictable wit, and very interestingly, his tendency to playfully thwart his master's schemes to pursue his own interests. Now, remember that one for later. But I think a lot of the physical character design here, combined with the sort of mentally deranged personality and that iconic laugh, is really just meant to communicate this simple concept, that this man is crazy, he's unhinged, and the fact that he of course isn't at all a jester by profession, he isn't a clown or object of amusement for a king, but instead like a soldier, a wizard, and a general at war, it just makes his apparel choices all the more absurd. An accurate reflection of his scrambled up mind. But I don't want you to ignore that real-world inspiration we just touched on because there are some very interesting things to be found in that discussion. So probably the most important thing I have neglected to mention up to this point is a specific character. The main character really of all of Final Fantasy VI, a girl named Terra Branford who has a very unique role in things. She is the only known instance of a half-human, half-Esper hybrid in the world. It's a whole thing you get a ton of backstory on in-game, but basically, her mother was a human and stumbled into the Esper world accidentally in the distant past, then fell in love with her Esper father, which enabled her to stay in that parallel world. Well, looking back to the aftermath of Gestall invading and initially stealing all those Espers, the Emperor actually stumbled upon this little unique family, including the newborn, and forcibly stole the child away, seeing her as a potential weapon in the future. So Terra was then pretty much raised in captivity, being studied and experimented on every day by the Empire. But at some point, when Terra was approaching adulthood, Kefka, of course, placed a slave crown on her head, a one-of-a-kind Magitech device that transformed her into a mindless servant of Palazzo. Then, as a little fun test, Kefka ordered Terra to use her magical skills to burn 50 Imperial soldiers alive, which she successfully did in just minutes. Rumors began to spread about the Empire having this new powerful witch amongst their ranks serving under Kefka, and really, the whole narrative setup of Final Fantasy VI is pretty much there in front of you. Now, usually, in this part of the video, we like to talk about what exactly the villain we are dissecting wants and why. You know, what they are doing as the game begins and what forces us to go on this big adventure to try to stop them. But honestly, with Kefka, I think you can see how things are a little bit different. Because, yeah, he's probably doing horrible things all around the world, but structurally, he is simply following the orders of an evil tyrant. He's a tool for someone else's malice, and honestly seems like an apparent mini-boss on our path of saving the world from the Empire. But, of course, as we have stated several times, our expectations are there to be broken. Final Fantasy VI has one of the most iconic opening scenes in video game history. After a little bit of establishing lore about the War of the Magi and some other things we talked about already, we are introduced to Terra, currently mind-controlled alongside two Imperial soldiers named Wedge and Biggs, all three of them clad in Magitech armor. They have been sent here to march on the northern snowy mining town of Narsh by the Empire to recover an ancient Esper that was discovered frozen solid in the ice, really a relic of that ancient conflict. But these are times of extremely high tension and, let's face it, war all around the continents, so even here, far from the capital, people are not very welcoming to Imperial forces. After fighting your way through town guards and dogs and eventually locating this frozen Esper, Terra has a predictably mysterious magical connection with the creature and a violent reaction ensues. In that mayhem, Biggs and Wedge are killed and the slave crown upon Terra's head is damaged. You pass out and wake up in the home of a townsperson hours later where your protagonist has her free will restored for the first time in, well, God knows how long. And guess what, RPG fans? Her memory is completely wiped. Thus begins a long and beautiful journey. Terra learns about a group called the Returners that are working behind the scenes against the Empire, and after meeting Locke, the thief, treasure hunter, the two of them head out of Narsh to keep Terra away from the evil forces until her memory can return. But it doesn't take long to get the first real look at our maniacal clown man. In the first flashback, we see Terra the moment she is enslaved, and some of the horrible things Kefka forced her to do. And although this is just a short wink of information, I think it does an amazing job setting the scale of the narrative early on, showing us just how evil this Kefka fella is and keeping you guessing about the true pecking order amongst all these antagonists. Well, anyway, Locke thinks to take Terra to a place called Figaro Castle to the south, where the king of that kingdom is openly an Imperial ally, but behind the scenes supports the Returners' efforts of resistance. Well, it just so happens that the Emperor Gestal, upon getting word of Terra's disappearance and liberation, sends Kefka and a platoon of soldiers to the very same Figaro Castle to question the king about a missing girl. And this, my friends, is where the Kefka show really begins. In the middle of a damn desert, he forces these terrified soldiers with him to dust off his boots and just shows like a childlike frustration at even being there at all. And that is another thing about this villain, man. He behaves like a petulant toddler pretty much from beginning to end. In fact, in the original Japanese text, he regularly refers to himself as Bokuchin, which is a pronoun most commonly used for young boys. This dude is a little freak. But again, even though this scene seems insignificant and small, I think it creates an important foundation of legitimate comic relief around this villain. His background music is kind of playful, mischievous, and lighthearted, and you just can't help but smile, laugh. Even though he's trying to track you down and probably murder you, you can't really take this guy seriously. But just seconds after, we see a stark contrast of Kefka's full kind of black-hearted nature. After speaking with Edgar the king and being told that this girl is not in the castle, Kefka just laughs in his face, leaves, and immediately sets Figaro on fire without hesitating, hoping to drive Terra out. Does he even know that she is in there? Does he just want to scare Edgar into bending the knee fully to the Empire? Does he even care about these things at all? In literally the blink of an eye, there are multiple violations of the Geneva Convention being committed here, but Kefka just finds it hilarious. Now thankfully, our heroes are able to escape on the back of some chocobos, and thankfully for Edgar's people, Figaro Castle has a little bit of a trick up its sleeve. It is built to contract and sink below the surface of the desert, which extinguishes the flames. Now, from here, we could go on and on about Terra, about her new friends, about their journey and the people they meet, the party they are building, the things they are trying to do. But remember, this is a villain video, son, so let's try to stick as close as we can to Mr. Palazzo and his movements. So after failing to secure Terra, Kefka moved east in a bit of a rage toward the Imperial camp located outside this other kingdom called Doma, a small, culturally rich country that dates back to the days of the War of the Magi. Well, here, another general by the name of Leo was leading the siege to overtake Doma, but the battle had kind of shifted to a stalemate. So upon Kefka's arrival, we get to witness some soldiers chatting about just how much he freaks them out. I love these little interactions. But Doma is also where we get to meet a great member of this game's cast, and a personal favorite of mine, the pensive samurai named Cyan, a loyal warrior of this little kingdom who refuses to give in to the opposing force outside. Well, Kefka came here with the sole desire to break the impasse by doing something particularly awful. His plan was to take command from Leo, poison Doma's water supply, and just kill all those people inside without lifting a finger in combat. And well, as chance would have it, Leo is recalled by the Emperor, and Kefka is free to do just that. Well, you arrive with just part of your party in time to overhear him and this plot, so you try to chase Kefka down to stop him, but annoyingly, he just refuses to fight back at all. He runs away like a little rugrat, grabs the poison, and you can only watch as he does the unthinkable. One by one, you see all those inside the castle walls drop like flies. I would say absolutely this is one of the most evil things our villain does in the entire game. Well, in the first half anyway. His own soldiers could be held captive inside, not to mention all the women, the children, and innocent elderly that simply call this place home. But of course, these facts make the act all the sweeter for Kefka. It gets even more personal when Cyan rushes inside of his home fortress to find his king, his wife, and his very young son succumbing to the tainted water and dying in his arms. It's one of those moments that transcends the cute pixel art aesthetic of this game and just hits you hard. It's just tragic and awful. We are coming to see every time he is on screen that Kefka, he is not there for comic relief in the slightest, but really is capable of hitting the good guys where it hurts most. But at the same time, his actions don't happen without consequence. Terra, King Edgar, Celeste, who defects from the Empire to join you around the same time, now Cyan, and many of the other 10 characters you recruit along the way here, are all in some way victims of Kefka's ruthlessness. This villain kind of messily leaves a string of bitter survivors in his wake that inevitably are going to find a ton of peace in teaming up with each other to try to put an end to this war and put an end to him. It's really, really good stuff. As the story continues, Kefka's next target is the city of Narsh, where everything started. I mean, that frozen Esper is something that the Empire still wants very, very badly, and with all the people you have met on your journey thus far, the Returners have built up quite a force to try to counter the bad guys this time. So, heading back to the mining city sets up the siege, one of the first real combat encounters you're going to have with Kefka. Now, this is a pretty irritating encounter, to be honest. You have to split your characters into 3 parties and position them in this little cramped maze as soldiers approach you slowly from all sides. But eventually you can kind of grind them down, push forward until you got to confront the little stinker himself. But wow, an incredible pixel art sprite in the battle here. I feel like you finally get to see how this character is kind of supposed to look in full scale. But the combat itself is very straightforward, and after defeating Kefka, of course, it is merely a setback. He flees and lives to fight another day. The good guys then kind of need to regroup and check in on that frozen Esper for themselves, and this is where Terra again has a wild, magical reaction to its presence. So wild, in fact, she almost murders all her friends accidentally and is reverted to her raw Esper form, then flies off in an untamed rage. Now this is the moment the game's narrative really feels like it opens up wide. So I want to make sure we don't get too deep in the weeds of the entire plot of Final Fantasy VI. I mean, this thing is pretty thick and complex. There are loads of characters shifting in and out of the narrative that we haven't even talked about. You got Setzer, the gambler who joins the party and unlocks the ability to freely fly around on an aircraft. Shadow, the mysterious ninja for hire, comes and goes as he pleases. Edgar's twin brother Sabin, the martial artist, has this incredible little tale to tell about a coin flip that decided the brothers' destinies years ago. And man, you even participate in a full-on production of an opera. But as far as Kefka is concerned, what's important at this point in the story is something that the party discovers while trying to help out Terra stuck in her Esper form. That the Espers, which the Empire had been crudely draining with complex machinery and tubes and then infusing humans with over the last handful of years, actually have a totally natural method of leaving behind their entire well of power when they die in the form of a little crystal called magicite. These crystals allow for far more efficient and safe use of magic, and gaining these shards of magicite for yourself is actually how mechanically the entire party is able to cast spells in this game. and it's becoming clearer and clearer as the hours go by that the only way you can really stop Kefka and the Empire for good is going to be with the help of those magical folks. So, you are sent to the Imperial capital to sneak into the main Magitech facility and free as many of the Espers as you can. This is a big deal, and while here, you observe Kefka walking around talking to absolutely nobody about something extremely dangerous. Awaken the Warring Triad. Well, that would be very bad. He then cruelly kicks a few Espers he bled dry down a garbage chute, and man, is this guy just the worst or what? So of course, you follow his movements, and soon enough, you find yourself in the heart of the laboratory. The Espers are suspended in the tubes like the Pokemon in the first Pokemon movie. But when you attempt to free them, they actually elect to turn themselves into Magicite for your party to use as they sense your good intentions. But Sid, the inventor responsible for all this technology, walks in at that very moment, completely awestruck. But unfortunately, he was not the only one eavesdropping. Kefka also gains all of this vital information, which is obviously terrible, and reveals to the party that the character Celeste I mentioned, the former Imperial general that joined your cause, was in truth a spy. Kefka then takes all your new shiny Magicite, Celeste teleports away with the villain, and you are just left to escape. Now, if Celeste went with Kefka to protect you, or she really was a double-crosser, is anyone's guess. So this is all obviously pretty horrible, but at least Sid here seems to have had a change of heart about all that he has done, and he wants to help the party get out safely. But this factory sequence here is massive, and I mean massive for our villain. He was already getting goofy powerful with the Magitech, but now, with the Magicite, he is legitimately on the fast track to some brand of godhood, and well, he seems totally giddy about it. But at this point in the story, one has to wonder, why? Why is Kefka doing all of this? Why would he want to wake up the Triad? Does he even fully understand what the consequences would be? Does he know the lore, man? All of these questions are set to be answered far sooner than you think. So to say that that mission was a failure is a massive understatement, and with all the Espers at the factory now belonging to Kefka, you really have to bring Terra directly to the entrance of the Esper world and just knock on that thing to see if you can acquire their help more directly. It feels like the only option. But of course, right after you fight your way through a difficult dungeon to get there, Kefka is right on your heels. As Terra tries to open the gate, Clownman reveals to the rest of the party, honestly a pretty insane truth, that they intentionally let Terra escape at the very beginning of the game in Narsh, because they knew that she would then go on this little personal quest of self-discovery and end up being the only way they could reopen the sealed gate to the Esper world. But at that very moment, all hell breaks loose, and Kefka's plans kind of go out the window. The gate flies wide open, and tons of very, very pissed off Espers rush out, flying into the human world and instantly wreaking havoc on it. They have been waiting for an opportunity to escape themselves, and enraged at their fellow Espers' capture and exploitation all those years ago, intend fully to burn this world to the ground to get their friends back. Kefka is blown away in the chaos, and the party can only watch from above as the madness ensues. Now, I do not think I'm alone in thinking during my first blind playthrough that this moment feels like the climax of the game. These two parallel worlds coming together again, all the chaos, the death, and really, that hunch feels confirmed by what happens next narratively. When you go back to the Imperial Palace, it is quite literally on fire, and the Emperor Gestal wishes to talk with you immediately. He, along with Sid, confess this deep, deep regret over all that has happened up to this point. He says he never could have imagined the power of the Espers being this terrible, and claims to have wanted to control the world, not destroy it. This event has truly changed his mind as well as his heart, and he asks what he can do to be forgiven and set things right as soon as possible. It comes off very sincere. He even says he threw Kefka in a cell, realizing he was too unpredictable and freaky after hearing about what happened at Doma. Now, if you poke around the palace yourself, you can see, sure enough, Kefka sits frustrated in jail. Maybe then this is meant to mirror the War of the Magi legend. You know, right at the moment of total devastation, those with the power to stop the bloodshed did so for the betterment of the world. And this time, it could be humanity and Terra, the link between these two worlds that could put things right. It feels so narratively appropriate, and it feels earned. So, the Emperor asks the party to please go to the Crescent Island where the Espers were seen heading and communicate with them. He even lends you his top remaining general, Leo, who's a very good man to act as an escort. Well, shoot, sounds great to me. Things are working out very quickly here. So you head right to that cave on that island. You meet with the Espers, and they also seem remorseful for the way things have gone. They are totally open to negotiations and head back to the nearby town with you to meet Leo and set everything straight. All the characters are laughing, the sun is shining, and the credits feel like they are primed to roll when you hear something deeply unsettling. You gotta be kidding me, man. Again? Isn't this guy supposed to be locked up? Well, guess what? You have been played. Yes, you have been lied to. That peace banquet and the sincerity from the Emperor, it was all a trick. A way to get all of the Espers in one place at one time so Kefka could zap them, turn them into magicite, and add to his comically large pooled power. Then, for good measure, with the party incapacitated on the ground, he also shapeshifts into the Emperor to mess with Leo's mind before murdering him in cold blood just because. This summons even more Espers from their realm to fight Kefka, but he just whoops them one by one, turns them into magicite. Kefka then leaves saying that it's time to claim his treasure beyond the gate, and you are left to assess how badly you just got duped. We see the two villains arrive at the gate to claim the warring triad, and after a very dramatic cutscene depicting the very earth being ripped apart and a small continent floating up toward the heavens, we see the petrified gods in-game for the very first time. Their alignment creating this perfect balance of magical harmony, and Kefka just stands by, supporting his master and laughing his ass off. Okay, fair play. If the game wasn't coming to a close a moment ago with the Peace Council, surely this is it. A final encounter on the floating continent with the Emperor and his minion, your last chance to restore the peace. Well, I always love when great video game villains create these intense situations that really enable us to feel heroic as the player. Dropping down off the airship here to land on this floating, grotesque landmass and facing extremely difficult enemies wave after wave, it definitely has the intended effect. But two of your party members of the past play very key roles in the upcoming confrontation, so let's remember who they are. Celeste, the once general, then friend, then spy who has been missing in action for some time, and Shadow, a man who acts pretty nonchalant and badass, but definitely cares about the cause for his own personal reasons. So walking up the stairs, we see these two bozos standing in front of the triad, but just before Terra and the boys can say a single word, Celeste comes out of nowhere to confront her former employers. Girl, you need to pick a side already. The Emperor channels the triad to freeze your entire party in place, and Kefka gives Celeste a chance to make everything right, handing her a sword and commanding she kill all of you guys in a show of loyalty. She seems conflicted, she walks back and forth, but instead rushes the clown man and stabs him right through the chest. Enraged and terrified at the sight of his own blood, Kefka very unsettlingly just freaks out and begins calling on the stone statues to show him the power they possess. He even jumps inside that ancient triangle of magic and attempts to channel their power for himself. Now this is like the moment of the entire game. Gestalt tells him to chill out, to get out of there, follow orders, explaining that awakening the statues would fully destroy the world, which is obviously not the goal. But Kefka just goes full Joker and decides to play a little game. Taunting his master, Gestalt is forced to try attacking Kefka in hopes of stopping him, but his magic has no effect. While inside of this triangle of the triad, he is completely protected, and he begins calling upon the god's power once more. Lightning rains down until eventually it strikes the Emperor bang on at the top of his head, and as he is dying, Gestalt struggles out my favorite line in the whole game: "The world is about to learn the meaning of fear." Kefka laughs as he rolls his master's corpse off the floating continent and into the open air. Just when it seems things can't get any worse, Kefka pushes Celeste aside and does it. He forces the triad out of alignment. The screen flashes as the balance of the world is broken, and before you can even comprehend what just happened, Shadow the ninja swoops in from, well, the shadows, squishing Kefka under one of the statues and giving your party mere minutes to get out and escape. That man is an absolute hero. So you do just that, right? Scramble away from the chaos and leap off the continent back onto the airship, but things are bad, really bad. The landscape of the planet is being ripped apart. Innocent people are dying, and eventually the airship splits in two as your party is thrown wildly into the air. The world is being destroyed. This feels like it wasn't supposed to happen. We made it there at the finish line, as usual, to stop the bad guys. All the plot beats led up to the singular moment of triumph, but guess what? The bad guy has won in whatever the hell it is he was trying to do, and now the world is fundamentally changed. Now, this entire scene to this day is one of the coolest in the history of RPGs to me, and it's the moment that makes this one of my favorite video games I think I have ever played. But believe it or not, this is a moment that almost didn't happen at all. According to an interview with some of the original developer team back in 2019, the initial plan with Final Fantasy VI was to make a pretty standard JRPG ending take place right here on the floating continent with us beating the bad guys as we expect to. But with extra development time ahead of them and a team of very creative people working on things, they decided to just flip the script completely and gave us one of the greatest gifts imaginable: the world of ruin. In truth, Kefka's success here in destroying everything is really only about the halfway point of this game, if you can believe it. The world of balance, the towns, the layout, the game map you knew, well, it is gone for good. So before we get into the true endgame discussion of our villain, let's just reflect for a moment on everything we have just seen and try to understand why it even happened at all. So, was this Kefka's real plan? Was he always scheming carefully from the beginning to get to this point? Is this what all the power he wanted was for? Well, listen, everyone is entitled to their own interpretation, but I personally choose to believe that when it comes to this guy's internal dialogue and approach as an antagonist, there quite simply was never much of a plan. Now, there is a very painfully obvious comparison you have maybe already made on your own between Kefka Palazzo and another famous evil makeup-wearing madman from pop fiction, and it's the Joker from Batman. And while they aren't identical characters by any means, there are more than a few foundational similarities in the way they behave. Now, most specifically, I think of a particular speech Heath Ledger's version of that character gives to Harvey Dent when he's lying in the hospital bed in The Dark Knight. If you remember, he speaks all about the other big players in the city of Gotham having some sort of scheme, right? Thinking that they can control their version of reality to then influence the outcome of all these crazy events. But that his strength as the Joker really comes from the fact that he is simply doing things. He describes himself as a dog chasing cars and has no idea what he would even do if he were to catch one. This is a speech I can hear coming from Kefka's mouth almost verbatim, though I guess he wouldn't really know what a car is. I think from the very beginning of Final Fantasy VI, he is just flying by the seat of his pants, following his first instinct that pops into his head, and thanks to him being genuinely insane, those instincts often involve violence and aggression. I have heard all those theories over the years that there's some internalized anger for what was done to him in those Magitech experiments way back in the day, and his run of evil is really about trying to do to everyone else what was done to him. And while I do like that idea, I think it gives Kefka a little bit too much credit as a man with self-awareness and foresight. Because beyond just being a chaotic type of villain, Kefka really is chaos itself. He is a force of nature in this narrative that you as the player can never prepare for whatsoever. You always, at every step, are only able to react to him. It's Kefka's story, really, and you are constantly following behind trying to patch up the sinking ship until all of a sudden, the ship's sitting at the bottom of the ocean, so to speak. And I think in a typical RPG, a villain that is this simple in his approach, his methodology, could definitely be seen as a dud, a pretty lame antagonist, and I do feel pretty strongly that if we had been able to slay him here, as was originally intended, Kefka would be pretty forgettable. But thankfully, that isn't the case. Well, if the world of balance was really Kefka's story, the world of ruin narratively is all about the heroes. Though, of course, we saw them being flung all over the place in the moving of the Triad, so who knows where they all are, and even if they all made it out alive. Somewhat surprisingly, things start back up from the point of view of Celeste, recovering for an entire year in this little shack by the sea, being cared for by Sid Marquez. Yes, it has been an entire calendar year since the destruction, which is just insane. Now, Sid tells you that as far as he knows, they are the only ones left on this little island, as the other survivors here all gave up hope, and it's heavily implied that they ended their own lives by jumping from a nearby cliff. It's very grim. But once Celeste is up and out of bed, it's actually time for you to care for Sid as he falls ill. This means going to the sea, catching fish, feeding him over and over again to nurse the old inventor back to life. Now, if Sid should fail to recover and dies, you see Celeste enter a deep, deep depression. She begins contemplating her role in all the hell that led up to this point. She's mourning the loss of everyone she ever knew, and it comes to a breaking point when she too decides to end it all at the cliffside. However, she doesn't die. She washes up on the shores of the beach to the sight of a seagull with a broken wing bandaged up with the headband of Locke, the thief. Treasure hunter. This gives her the spark of hope that maybe some of her friends did survive. Maybe they're still together out there somewhere. Celeste, in a frenzy, then builds a raft to escape her solitude and heads for the mainland. It doesn't take long for you to encounter Sabin, then Edgar, then Setzer, then Tara, and slowly but surely have heartfelt reunions with all of the old gang. But this right here is the perfect introduction to the second half of this story. Starting with Celeste, we see all of those main protagonists in their very own unique way, searching desperately for a purpose, a reason to live in this new reality, and a way to accept their own personal failures of the past. When you find Sabin, he's helping children escape from a crumbling building, remarking that even the end of the world couldn't kill him. Cyan ended up finding a woman writing to her deceased boyfriend hoping for a reply, and so moved by her devotion, began impersonating that boyfriend via letters from a mountaintop to give this woman some peace of mind. He also crafted flowers for her out of silk with his hands and reflected on the loved ones that he himself lost. Then you have Tara, who is found volunteering her time in a small orphanage. The children all revere her, they call her Mama, and surely this is filling some sort of personal void given the way she was raised. It's just amazing to me how well all of these characters are written and how they decide to react to the literal end of the world, because some of them aren't so well adjusted. Setzer, the gambling pilot, is down in the dumps big time in a bar and needs to be reminded by his friends that there's always still hope. Stroggle, the old sage, believes his granddaughter Realm was killed because of him and thus joins the cult of Kefka. But in time, every single one of them come around, and there are even new, strange friends to recruit, like Gogo, the enigmatic mimic. But, well, the bad news is, in the year that has elapsed, Kefka has been very busy as well. The villain has established himself as something of a god, literally, and has constructed this massive tower as a show of his divinity that reaches the heavens where the imperial capital once stood. And from atop this tower, he strikes fear into the hearts of all those still unfortunate enough to be living, threatening to use something known as the Light of Judgment to purge anyone who displeases him. This is a post-apocalyptic land ruled by fear, by wicked, false holiness, and of course, it is up to you and your friends to finally put an end to it. But man, I could rant about the world of Ruin all day. So many incredible quests here. Going into the trippy-ass nightmares of Cyan when you visit his home castle of Doma again, defeating all the elemental dragons tucked away in the various dungeons, recruiting the berserker Yeti Umaro, taking down the Master of Magic atop the cultist's tower, the hidden castle, it just goes on and on. Now, it's worth noting that you can face Kefka's tower anytime, but what you really want to do here is explore, grind levels, uncover all the lore you can, and get a full roster of strong heroes beyond just your favorite 4, and equip them with the finest magic and weapons you can get your hands on. And at last, when you feel ready, Kefka is patiently awaiting your arrival. Well, this tower is a rather small, short, and straight up ugly final dungeon. It's made up of all the scrap metal and debris from the former Imperial City and Magitech factory, so it has this kind of brown junkyard vibe to it. I just feel like a man with Kefka's sense of style should probably be doing way better. But here you are forced to yet again split your characters into 3 parties of 4 for the finale, being very careful to distribute your strongest heroes and items somewhat evenly anyway, as all 3 of these groups are going to be forced to face some pretty serious bosses up ahead. And on you go. You explore through, fighting waves of very difficult and irritating enemies, swapping between your parties to hit switches, open doors for each other, until eventually you find yourself at the end. And of course, before you reach the summit of the tower, there is a round of very interesting mini-bosses standing in your way. It's who else but the remaining husks of the Triad. Fiend, Demon, and Goddess, the gang is all here. Each of your parties has one to take down until they all fall, and at last you climb to the top of this tower to face evil. The music swells, the camera pans up, we hear that trademark laugh just like the good old days, and you know, for sure this time, that you are at the end. So in this final conversation, the multitude of themes we have talked about all video long come boiling up to the surface at once, but with a kind of new sort of tint from Kefka himself. Because you see, his conclusion 1 year later, after reaching the peak of his power, is plain: that life is meaningless. Everything around us, from the flowers and birds, our friends and loved ones, to the sun and stars, it's all destined to wither and fade. So why then do people cling so hard to life? It frustrates Kefka. He sees it as pathetic. Beneath him, there is no beginning and middle, merely the ultimate end. Now this is classic, full four-course, pure nihilism. The musings of a man who thinks he has had some sort of existential evolution between the ears and thus crowned himself the king of nothing. The master of deciding when people, places, and things die because, well, they're all headed there anyway. But then the party hits back with the truth that yes, death is natural, but the point of life is finding something worth living for, right here and now, no matter what it is. Each hero then sounds off on the thing that they kind of learned during the game, the thing that kept them going through the end of the world, until Kefka has finally had enough. He wants to crush that very worldview. He wants to crush our dreams and have us all embrace the endlessness of the void. No more words from him. It's time to fight. Now, this encounter is absolutely bonkers. It's very challenging if you're going in blind, and, well, it's full of surprises. Because you begin opposite, well, not Kefka, but something very strange you've never seen up to this point called the Statue of the Gods, which looks like a big demon without legs. And after defeating that, you scroll up this big twisting mechanical thing to see an amalgam of different bodies warped and wrapped together. And then after that, at the top of this, statue, looks to be a lounging young man gazing into the heavens. Now, what this structure of a boss is has long been debated by fans here on the internet, but I choose to buy into the most popular theory that it is meant to be a reference to the epic poem, the Divine Comedy, written by Dante in the year 1321. A story which chronicles the author's own journey through all the stages of the afterlife where eventually he reaches heaven. So hell would be the first stage of the fight, where in the Divine Comedy, Satan is depicted as this monstrous creature stuck up to his waist in a frozen lake. The second stage then would be Purgatory, which Dante describes as a land of endless suffering and spiritual growth, and finally the third is Paradise, where Dante is blessed with meeting all of the famous saints. But this top level has also always reminded me of the Michelangelo statue of Pieta, which captures the moment Jesus was taken off the cross and handed to his mother Mary. But listen, if you vibe with this whole Divine Comedy parallel, the final stage of Dante's journey is meeting God face to face and learning the true meaning of all life. And so this is that big moment. Kefka, the god of magic, descends from the golden heavens looking like a classic Christian archangel and shares with you his version of the ultimate wisdom. Oh my god, no pun intended, it is just incredible. 10 out of 10, 11 out of 10, perfect in every way. I get goosebumps just looking at it right now with you. Absurdly cinematic, loaded with commentary on pretty much everything in existence, and just gotta be one of the greatest final boss battles ever constructed. But the fight here starts quick, and Kefka is no pushover. On his very first turn, he's going to use an ability that brings your entire party to 1 HP, which is like the most classic Final Fantasy boss move of all time, but this one kind of has the thematic flavor of feeling like he's forcing you all to kneel before his might, which I love. Now my strategy with this fight is just to spam my most powerful spells and attacks non-stop while casting high-level life and healing things to make sure when someone does go down, as they kind of inevitably will, they're gonna get back up. But it's kind of cool mechanically here that if someone is to die, they are just replaced with one of the characters from your B and C teams which are watching from the sidelines. Now Kefka goes into different phases of strategy and aggression when his health reaches certain thresholds, with the last being obviously the most dangerous. I usually like to beat him using Setzer with the Master Scroll and the fixed dice combination. If you don't know what that is, man, just look it up. It is hilariously busted. But no matter your approach, no matter how many levels you had to grind, how many attempts it takes, once all goes according to plan, finally, after this long, strange, awful journey he has dragged you all on, Kefka Palazzo is defeated. Without saying a single word, he crumbles into dust before your eyes and meets his true end here atop his tower. But there's little time to celebrate. With Kefka's death also comes the death of magic itself. The spire around you begins to collapse, and we see our heroes all working together in various ways to escape, board the airship, and make a clean getaway. The day has been won, but there is a cost. The pieces of Magicite, the very souls of the Esper people, are disintegrating away, and everyone turns to Terra wondering if she too will disappear. But no. Thanks to her finding a personal sense of purpose and a reason to live on in the children at her orphanage and the friends she has made, the human half of her perseveres. For the first time in a long time, the world is at peace. We see the sun shining, our party basking in their victory, and the credits roll on one of the greatest video games ever made. If you have watched my content over the last few years, I think you know how rare it is for me to really pick through an entire game beginning, middle, and end like I just did. But with Kefka and Final Fantasy VI, man, it just feels like the only way to do it. Because, well, first off, there's no voice acting in this game, right? So I can't let these scenes and the writing really speak for themselves in the format I like. And I feel genuinely it is super important to show and dissect all of his most evil moments to get a full scope of who this character is. But we started this whole video off talking about player expectations, right? Those baked-in assumptions about traditional stories that we all carry with us. So if you didn't know already before watching this video, I hope you see now how groundbreaking and important this villain was and continues to be, especially when you consider he made his debut back in the early 1990s. I mean, man, this brand of twist was just simply not mainstream back then. There are probably hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people around the world who played this title in its time and just had their socks thoroughly knocked off by what happens in it. This villain opened the door for far more nuanced and interesting stories to be told in this medium in the decades that followed, and that is a fact. For years on this channel, I have called GLaDOS from Portal and Portal 2 the best villain I have ever covered, but today, man, I think perhaps she finally has a real challenger for that spot. Kefka and his chaotic actions teach the player that this time around, you're gonna fail. You can't stop it. You can't stop him. You can't change what has happened, but you can learn to accept it. Your band of heroes can process all their grief, all their pain, and then look down the barrel of nihilism and choose to hope, choose to live. And ultimately, you don't go to all that effort in the world of ruin to finally defeat Kefka for revenge necessarily, or to turn back time. You defeat Kefka to give the whole world a chance to feel that hope and a chance to start anew.